Hi everybody. Today we're going to review classes and IDs in HTML and CSS, and we're going to take a look at hover effects, and then we'll ask you to create a button styling so that you can make things look like they're active and alive so that users can quickly see that that's something they should click on and expect to have something happen. So let's jump on over here into Replit. I'm going to show you real quickly. I've got this page. If I reload, we'll get the most updated version. It's got a header, an article with some paragraphs, and some code pieces that I've styled up here. And then it's got these links to the different parts of this. And I'm not nearly tall enough to demonstrate that. So if I shrink that up a ways, we'll be able to see that right now nothing happens. Well, maybe it should. So let's start by reviewing IDs and classes. And you'll see this in the Replit. So an ID gives an element a particular name. And based on that name, you can style it. Very specific styling, the most specific. You can link to it so that it scrolls to that spot on the page. And you can, if you're doing JavaScript, you can access that element and manipulate it based on that ID. So an ID is really powerful. But as far as styling goes, it's better off to use classes because you might at some point find that you've got something else that you want to style in that way. And so starting with a class is always better unless you've got some particular reason why that is the only one on the page. Okay. So to add an ID to something, you just use it as an attribute. Like here, it says ID equals some link. So that would give this ID to an element added within the tag. So in the end, it would look like this does right here. And then for IDs, you want to style it with the hashtag selector. So here you would say hashtag somelink and then style it that way. Or you can link to it with the same thing. You say ahref equals hashtag somelink. And if it's on some other page, you would give it the full page information that it needs and end in that hashtag. Classes are much more common at the level that we're at when you're just doing static web pages because classes you can have multiples. With IDs, there should only be one of it on a page, and each element can only have one ID. With a class, any class can have multiple elements, and one element can have multiple classes. You add it in much the same way. It's just an attribute added on to the starting tag. And like for instance here, you would say class equals local pages. Or if you want multiple classes, you could say class equals local pages, new pages. And when you style a class, I don't think I put that one in here, you use the dot selector. So let's add that into the HTML real quick. You can style elements within a class. Let's see if I can actually learn how to type here. With the dot selector, as in dot, what did I say, local pages, and then you put whatever you want in there. Okay, so let's reload this page, see what that looks like. There we go, dot local pages, curly brace, and the rest. Let's do some of this work, and like I said, then we're going to mess around with the hover effect. So right now I have at the top these two A elements that are designed to get us down to spots in our code. So right now they don't work because I don't have those. So I could say h2 id equals, and what did I use up here? IDS. Okay. And then down here at classes, I can say h2 space id equals classes. So I've added those IDs. I've got my links to them already, hashtag classes, ahref equals hashtag IDs. So if I reload and I shrink this up so that there's actually some scrolling to be done, and if I click on IDs, it scrolls so ID now is at the top. And if I click on classes, it scrolls classes isn't at the top because there just isn't enough, it's just not squeezed up enough to do it. Right, so that's a little higher. Tries to get as high as it can, but it can't go below the bottom of the page. but it brings it onto the screen. So that's good. And that's how we link to a particular ID. We've seen this also in, like Wikipedia uses this a lot. If we look up web design in Wikipedia, we see a table of contents, and it's got, let's say we look at typography, and it jumps down to here, and see there's this hashtag typography in here. So we can link to that spot on that page from our page in much the same way. So if I come here and I say href equals wikipedia.org/wiki/webdesign hashtag typography, and we put in typography, and then I reload this page. I'm going to get rid of that so it's all brand new, and I'm going to click it. It's going to take this page and it goes directly to that same typography spot. So that's how we link to an ID with those other pieces. So we're going to talk about hover effects next. But in order to get started, we're going to put in a class. So I want all of these elements in my nav to be of the type button. And it doesn't matter what you name classes, it should just be meaningful. The same is true of IDs. So I'm going to say class equals button. And I'm just going to copy that and spread this out a little bit so that I can see a little better. And tighten up my code a little bit here by using some enters. I'll paste class equals button on that, and class equals button on that. Okay, so now they have that class, and we'll see when I jump this out that that changes nothing right now because I don't have any styling for it. If I want to style it, I would come into styles.css and I would say dot button. And I've got some styling for the nav A piece, but maybe I want my buttons to have a 3-pixel outset black margin and a border bottom of 1 pixel solid blue. This will just demonstrate that we can do that. Okay. I don't necessarily like that because it's jumping down out of this a little bit. The sizing's wrong. One thing that might help is if I make that display inline block, that forces the other space to expand out around it, so that works a little better. And I might want to make that text decoration none to get rid of that underline so that it's just like that. Okay, not necessarily the best style in there, could be a little bit better, but it's showing up. Okay. No, this should have been border, not margin. What am I doing? So then this one doesn't make any sense anymore. There we go. And I might want to put a little padding in that as well. There we go. That gives it a little bit of space. And then this is not maybe the best button styling. You'd want to find some that you like. But then I can use this hover effect. Hover is a pseudo element, as a pseudo class, I apologize, pseudo class, which means it's a thing that doesn't really exist, but it's based on a condition within the page. So if I come here and I say dot button colon hover, when I hover over something of the class button is what that means, then I want the color to become, it's currently light gray. I'm just going to invert it, right? My background color is gray. My color's light gray, background color is gray. So let's go with a color of white and a background color of black. That'll be at least clear what's going on. So I reload, and now when I hover over, it does this inversion thing, okay? So the hover effect makes it so that when something goes over something else, when you hover over something, that's a better way to describe it. when you hover over something, a certain set of styles should apply. One thing that's also useful, the reason why that mouse is turning into that hand pointer thing is because this is already an A element, so by default it does that. If I put one of these in here that's just a span though, I do this a lot in JavaScript, when you're working with JavaScript. Here's a click to nowhere. There we go. Because it's class button, it gets the same basic styling. The coloring is different because it's not an A. But it still gets that hover effect of the colors. But notice that the cursor is now this thing that makes it look like I should be able to manipulate the text. I don't really like that. So one thing I can do is come here, and in that button hover, I can say cursor pointer. Okay? And now when I hover over it, it acts just like the others, and I can't really tell the difference between the A's and the spans, except that I know that that light gray coloring is happening because of the nav A. Okay? Whereas the nav has a color of white. So that's the only difference, that's the only hint that these are different at all. Entirely because of this button styling. If I take that button off of one of these A tags, take it off of the IDs one, and I reload this page, we'll see that that one loses all that button styling. It maintains the font color because that comes from that nav A styling. It gets its underline back. It loses its hover effect, right? So that's the way hover pieces work. I can do them on bigger things too. I can do them on, let's say, paragraphs. So if I go here and I say p:hover, background color black, color white, border 2 pixels, let's go with dotted red. We reload. I can hover over these, and I lose my code coloring a little bit because that black doesn't work out very well. You want good contrast. It looks kind of ugly, but it demonstrates that you can make that adjustment. And do you see that little twitch that's going on when I hover on or off? That's because by changing the border size on hover, I'm changing the size of the element. It's part of that box model. So you want to be careful about doing that. One way to get around that is to have a default styling that says border 2 pixels, solid, transparent. So it's there, but you can't see it. Okay, it spreads things out a little bit, but now there's no twitch. So that's one way to make the border happen. So that takes care of IDs and classes, creating and styling. I didn't style any based on ID because you generally don't want to if you can avoid it. And it takes care of using those hover effects. You can apply whatever you want. I'll add one thing to the hover effect though, and that is that if you want it to go slowly, you can add a transition. I usually use all and 0.3 seconds, 0.3s. For the sake of demonstration, I'm going to put it at 1s for now, so it's slow. I'm going to reload. I go here, and when I hover, you see that it takes a second for that change to happen. Okay, and then you want that to be pretty subtle, so I would not ever actually use a full second. I would use like a third of a second. So it's pretty subtle, but it feels alive. So that transition is really powerful as well. So the next thing I'd like you to do is to go and find a button somewhere out there on the internet that you think looks great and see if you can mimic it up. Make sure that it's got some hover effect going on and try to match it. Thanks, everybody.